It's been out for a while now. Do I still need to start every video with a spoiler warning? Whatever. Good evening, and welcome to another video on the lore of Rainworld the Watcher. This time we'll be specifically focusing in on the weirdest, most inexplicable mysteries of the Rainworld lore. Now that we have all the information on the Watcher ever since the update granted us those two lovely new endings, I finally feel at liberty to discuss the weirdest parts of it. So, Rainworld's always had weird lore, but previously it was small stuff like why do the shoreline got those weird things in it, or why are the buildings like that. But now, oh boy, let's just say this video is a little out of my depths when it comes to the topics I'm discussing here. These topics are very vague and can be interpreted in a number of different ways, so if my interpretation doesn't fit with your ideas, there's a solid chance we're just disagreeing on something that's too vague to have blatant facts. Though if there are blatant facts that I'm missing, please do tell me. You get to feel superior to me, and I get engagement. So it's a win-win. But before we begin, and stop me if you've heard this one before, I need to shill. If you've been watching over the last month or two, you should already know who it is. It's Critical Error Computing. Critical Error Computing is a computer building company co-run by a close friend of mine. Probably their strongest suit, in my opinion, would have to be their customer-friendly policies. They work in close communication with you to make sure you get the computer you want. Most of their services focus on higher-end rigs, but they also offer some lower-cost options for the people that are a bit more stingy about it. If you've been looking to buy a new gaming PC, I couldn't recommend any company higher. The only thing I ask is that if you do order something from them, use my affiliate link at cec.direct/daszombies. Thank you all for listening. Let's lore it up. Starting out, let's go exactly where you were expecting me to go, Outer Rim. Specifically, let's talk about the weird-ass stars that are constantly alluded to in all the information we have on this region. So, to give you a bit of context, in the dusty deserts of Outer Rim, there are a bunch of these massive cylindrical metal structures called star catchers. Alongside these star catchers, these green motes of light fall from the sky in the background. There's even green sparkles in the dusty air labeled stardust in the game files. Considering the stars are falling and the star catchers are named that, we can assume the star catchers are catching the stars. Wow. That's the sort of deep lore you come to this channel for. No, but seriously, what's going on? Well, first off, let's discuss the other times we see stars in Rainworld. The main thing that comes to mind is at the very top of the wall in the base game. The most important things here are the fact that these stars are not only visible in the daylight, but they're also green. And for those inattentive gamers in the back who looked away from the screen the moment I started talking with big words, the Outer Rim stars are also green, so they're probably the same type of star. Now, we can't get much from the stars being green outside of a bit of correlation. There aren't any real green stars that we know of scientifically, and this could just be a suspension of disbelief thing, but the fact that we see the stars themselves falling down to the surface of the planet and not incinerating everything, we can assume they're probably not the same idea of a star that we have, as in those gigantic celestial balls of flaming gas. They're probably some other unique sort of thing. Now, going into cosmology isn't my intention, that'll be in the next entry, but we do know that the Rainworld does have a traditional star in one way or another. We see a literal day-night cycle, so we can assume there's a sun. In fact, one echo literally mentions the sun rising, so yeah, there's almost certainly a sun. That being said, we do have a bit more knowledge to go with that. In the Cold Storage Pearl, we see a benefactor musing about star energies. We'll come back to this in a sec, but the main thing here, he says, is the words, "our own dear star," so we can assume they have a big one somewhere. So these lesser stars, as I'll be calling them, are likely much smaller. They're also probably not actual distant space stars, but likely some sort of satellite orbiting the planet. They're also visible during the day, after all, so they must be either rather bright or very close. When their time comes, they could possibly fall down to the planet's surface, or optionally, they could be brought down by the star catchers in a sort of tractor beam-like tech. Overall, we know very, very little about Outer Rim, but in that Cold Storage Pearl, we hear the writers speak on harvesting star energies. Apparently, the benefactors were pretty gung-ho about that idea, and the writer of the Pearl wasn't too big of a fan of it. But without going too in-depth, the Pearl itself tells us that the capture and harvesting of stars was something the benefactors were planning on doing to combat the dimming light of their own star. The star catchers themselves are named presumably to do just that, catching and harvesting the stars for energy. The Pearls also mention the increased precipitation of dust, which is pretty common in Outer Rim. It's kind of everywhere. We also see another pearl, an image one, showcasing a bright green sphere getting touched by this little metal dongle. Now, this could just be anything, and oh wait, no, the pearl's found on a starcatcher, so this is almost certainly what occurs inside the starcatchers. This gives us a much closer look at those lesser stars. We can see that there are large green balls of energy that can presumably be harvested via the little metal dongle. Considering their size, they likely wouldn't be visible at all from the planet's surface unless they were within orbit of the planet. Now, the actual stars in the sky don't move super frequently, and the cosmology is really weird, but the idea that the starcatchers drag down what seem to be large balls of greenish energy orbiting the planet to harvest them in a world where the light from the sun has begun to truly fade does seem like a pretty good conclusion for Outer Rim. But we're not done with Outer Rim because, yeah, when I said I wasn't going to be explaining cosmology, I didn't mean it. Let's get deep in this shit. Now, the cosmology of Rainworld is really, really weird. It's kind of swept under the rug all the time. We never get a clear explanation. The only real times we see it mentioned are in Outer Rim and in a single Farmer-Raised Pearl, which mentions stars being fixed upon their celestial spheres. Celestial spheres likely referring to a model showcasing the stars literally fixed onto a sphere that surrounds the planet. Both these examples bring up more questions than answers, but one other example of ancient cosmology actually offers a bit of a solution. You see, if we look into the game files, we can see that the background of Outer Rim describes something called a firmament cloud. Now that sounds like an important title for what is ostensibly just a random bit of cloud texture, so what does it mean? Well, in ancient cosmology, the firmament clouds are often described as a cloud barrier put in place between the heavens and the earth by God. There's also some other shit with a deep ocean being on top of it, but the main thing we need to know is that the firmament clouds are specifically a barrier in a sphere above the world. This leads us to ask, is there a literal barrier of clouds that surrounds Rainworld? The clouds above Five Pebbles don't seem like the firmament in the same way, they're just clouds in a proper blue sky, but these ones in Outer Rim are different somehow. But this leads me to ask a potentially silly question. Do we know if the titular Rainworld is actually a world? Or more accurately, do we know if it's a planet? Think about it. We never once get any form of cosmology that seems to be dated past the old times of geocentrism. It could be that the world actually occurs inside a firmament, a barrier of clouds that literally encompasses a flat disk. This could also explain Outer Rim, why it's called that this was quite literally the rim itself of that disk, where the clouds of the firmament are so close that they form what looks to be a wall. This would also stop us from questioning how a planet could exist with an entirely liquid void sea core. It could just be a flat plane beneath the flat plane. This interpretation would also help with the debacle of the dust. If we didn't have to adhere to actual planetary astronomical logic, we could just assume that the dust goes down into the void and then gets somehow sent up through the firmament and around and then rains again. This also lets us form a bit of a cleaner debate towards the green stars. Rather than being satellites that orbit it, what if they were fixed upon the firmament, that celestial sphere? That would let us fit both conclusions we reached into the same idea of cosmology. Again, this might sound super drastic, but both the idea of a firmament cloud barrier and the idea of celestial spheres have been brought up in Rainworld, whereas traditional ideas of planetary physics and astronomy and orbit have yet to be brought up in any way. There's more proof that Rainworld occurs in a flat plane surrounded by a heavenly cloud barrier than there is to assume that it occurs in a universe of stars and planets like ours. Right, okay, well, that was a mouthful, and it was pretty ground shaking, so how about we move on to something a bit different from discussions on esoteric ancient cosmology, and into something equally hard to explain. You know, I just realized, for the entire channel history, I've had multiple opportunities to discuss the weirdness involved with karma flowers, and I haven't. The Watcher's given me even more opportunities, something about alternate selves and different planes contacted through hallucinogenic drug plants and campfires with your homies, and now we have weird portals, too? Sounds like a pain in the ass to make sense of, so how about this? I'm gonna go for a bit. You can just say that I told you about that, and then you'll all put down a bunch of comments about how awesome and informative that segment was and how much you learned, okay? Cool. I'm gonna go eat ice cream on the toilet for a few minutes. Be back in a bit.
Did somebody mention drugs? Oh, right, karma flowers. They may be the most insightful glimpse we get into the nature of transcension. Moon describes how the wheel flower became the symbol for enlightenment, as it allowed its user to contact the selves of other planes of existence, dreams, memories, and imagined worlds. It essentially allowed one to temporarily experience ascension, that being the letting go of the physical self, in order to contact spiritual selves in other planes. This is why the flower came to represent enlightenment, as the process of ascending involves both the departure from the physical world and the unification of all the selves, illustrated in the final ascension ending, where all of our scattered selves unite at one point. Basically, the karma flowers were kind of a free trial for experiencing ascension for the benefactors. With this context in mind, let's look at a few examples where the karma flowers, or the dialogue describing them, may be relevant to Watcher. Perhaps the most obvious is the fate of the prince in one of the endings. We see the flowers sprout out of the sentient rot, paralyzing him. One theory ties this event to concepts surrounding karmic alignment, which can be related to Hunter. Hunter is described as karmically imbalanced, as they push the confines of their place in the ecosystem. This results in them being shunned by the spiritual realm, causing no karma flowers to sprout, the only exception being their final death, where a karma flower can be found on their final resting place in other campaigns. This may also be what causes their illness, which has been described as being related to the rot. Combining these ideas to what happened to Prince, one may interpret both of these events as some sort of cosmic entity or force removing karmically imbalanced individuals from the cycle. At the very least, what happened to both Prince and Hunter seem tied in some way. Additionally, we know that the portals are at least indirectly tied to the karma flowers, having some sort of stabilizing effect when using Watcher's ability. This makes sense, since we already know that they are tied to contacting other planes of existence. Some examples being dreams, memories, and imagined worlds. It has long been a theory since the beginning of Watcher that regions like Ancient Urban aren't exactly real, rather representing the memories of Spinning Top. Finally, a few Watcher pearls may make references that are related to the selves described in the Karma Flower dialogue. One Ancient Urban pearl briefly references a banned concept called Eigen Selves, which can be interpreted as a restriction for iterators contacting or controlling spiritual selves in other planes of existence. And of course, the Migration Path pearl describes 3 pillars of self, but that dialogue deserves a section of its own. I'll leave it to Das to explain the rest of that stuff before my brain self-destructs.
And I'm back. Okay. Ooh, sorry, that took a while. That stuff runs through you like a waterfall. Anything happened while I was gone? No? You all look well-informed for some reason. Was somebody out here distributing well-put-together analysis to you kids? Lord knows you ain't getting it from me. Anyways, let's keep going before that rest of that ice cream melts. Right, okay, next up, another big question. The 3 pillars of self. More accurately, we'll just be discussing the Migration Path Pearl in general because it's really weird. That's right, the funny Kmart Pearl is an entire mystery in and of itself on the same level as the entirety of Outer Rim. Imagine I'm cracking my knuckles here before we get into this nonsense. Okay, so I'll spare you the whole read-through of the Pearl. Let me rephrase it in a way that fits my interpretation. Ahem. For a long time, the benefactors considered there to be multiple notions of the self. Basically, the thing that makes us know that we are ourselves. It starts with the 3 notions defined by the 3 waves of a river, then 5 notions represented by the points on a star, then the final interpretation of 3 columns. These ideas of a self split into multiple notions that long predate the current method of thinking. But it also showcases how the ancestors of the current benefactors had an idea of whatever the fuck a cosmic retransfiguration is. Something attained by starting with an idea of multiple selves, then whatever the fuck a cosmic intercedence is, and then the self is transformed, ending with the notion of 3 columns. Okay, so that effectively tells us that the ideas of the self were something that the benefactors were very interested in even in ancient times, but we should probably discuss what a cosmic retransfiguration and an intercedence is. Definition-wise, a retransfiguration just means a shifting around of stuff. This could be representing the way that the benefactors sought to change their own selves to attain a level of transcendence, as they've been known to want. An intercedence is a little more interesting. When de-thesaurused, it means an interruption. A cosmic intercedence could be viewed as a type of divine intervention, or at least an epiphany of some kind. Putting this into context, the path to cosmic retransfiguration starts with a notion of multiple selves, the waves in a river, that after some sort of disruption or interruption from the cosmos, it begins to expand into the 5 points on a star before finally setting down into the 3 pillars of self. Okay, so we've decoded that. What does that mean? Well, I think it's meant to showcase the Watcher's actual journey to retransfiguring the cosmos, aka fixing the cycle in the proper ending. It starts out with the Watcher at a base level following the same category of self as the others, a notion of the multiple, before something cosmic, presumably spinning top, breaks in and forces the Watcher to understand more of itself, an expansion of the self in all directions until it deflates and reforms into the concrete notion of the 3 columns. Note that these 3 columns are literally the exact same thing we find in Daemon that triggers the ending. This ending is the only one in which the Watcher actually transcends and properly retransfigures the cosmos. There are a few other theories about this that I want to bring up though. Notably, UraniumEater's video discussing this pearl brings up the ideas that the multiple selves are understood through the interactions with Spinning Top and the Prince, with the cosmic intercedence being the Weaver, which, if we go by my prior theory that the Weaver is somehow also the Watcher, sounds like a much more cosmic thing than an echo like we've seen all over the place. Using these theories to discuss this pearl makes a lot more sense. If we assume that cosmic retransfiguration refers to the shit we did at the end of the Watcher, if it's not that, then I'm throwing my hands up in the air because that's the only thing that really makes any sense. UraniumEater's video discusses it in much more depth and in a smart way and brings up some of the stuff I didn't mention, so maybe check it out after this. It's a real good watch. Alrighty, last up, the Rot Void Worm. This one's a real doozy, because even though I've discussed it before, it feels even weirder now that we have a new context for the Void Worms, to say the least. But the first thing we need to discuss before we even touch the Rot Void Worm is the sentient rot itself. What is it? Well, we can assume from the Prince's dialogue that the sentient rot sprung forth from a fully consumed iterator. We get this idea from the Prince giving us the mark and then making the comment that he's not so different after all, assumedly not so different from the thing he's made to replicate. We also get the idea from the Prince in general. He's iterator-shaped, places his own general systems, both in the form of speaking systems, and mentions them and their forebearers, assumedly referring to the iterators and the benefactors, respectively. So a consumed and replicated iterator bore a type of rot that had enough of a mind to understand and grow in a way that is wholly unique from simple consumption. Rather, it seems to be forging a way through time and the paths of the broken cycle to consume as much as it can and grow from it. We can actually aid it in this, thus allowing its consciousness to fully blossom into the Prince. The Prince mentions how his goal is to end the cycle, doing so by consuming everything and turning it all into one great substrate of life, where bugs and gods alike are all merged into one. If we compare this to Ascension, we get a pretty stark difference. Ascension, attained by letting go of all your natural urges and becoming more disconnected from the cycle, has you untethering yourself from the cycle forever and moving forward into something completely new. Rotsension, as is a pretty solid name for it, simply has everything that was you cease to be, emerging with the greater thing, rather than ascending or descending or transforming, reduced from a sentient, intelligent life to mindless bioslop. We see that when Hunter suffers the same fate. We lose control of it. Its cycle as we know it ends, and the Hunter Longlegs begins. You're still in the cycle, you're just not you anymore. This, plus the fact that the rod itself is covered in crosses, that same symbol that can be seen on Karma 10, which is the symbol found all around the depths and the Guardians. I should also point out that these karma symbols are also found inside the throne, made from the odd biomass that makes up the walls. So that understanding of Ascension was already being mimicked by the sentient rot even before the Prince was properly born. So this brings us to the Rot Void Worm, finally, found in the remnants of Five Pebbles' unfortunate development. My previous theory stated this was a type of mimicry of Ascension, but considering we now know that the Void Worms can be made from something really powerful being ascended, maybe this was something similar. We can't know, this is really fanfiction-y, but maybe this was born of an entity that could have become a Void Worm if it properly ascended, but instead it was consumed. Or maybe it's just the rot having a vague understanding of Ascension, turning into and mimicking this form that it understands. There's absolutely no way this is a void worm that was overtaken by the rot. That is, as far as we're aware, completely impossible, and the name of the region implies it was an evolution of some kind, and the absence of any living rot on the walls of this area make me think it might have all been coagulated and turned into this new form, this gargantuan thing swimming through the shell of an old iterator. But that leaves the question, is this really even a space that exists? Like, anywhere? I don't mean like, yeah, this is obviously a thing that exists in the world. I'm talking more... like, would this be in Silent Construct? We could assume that Five Pebbles would have collapsed long before this would have ever happened, but nothing here denotes that. Maybe this is a far future version of it, where it's either collapsed and somehow not buckled under its own weight and split open, then grew into the rot void worm over a super duper long period of time. Or it could be something else. This area is counted among the likes of the rotted regions, so maybe it's from a similar timeline to those ones, one where the rot has properly consumed everything. Maybe all that rot everywhere and the amount of time that passed led this sort of thing to happen inside Five Pebbles. But that's really all I have to say about those mysteries. This was a really fun video to go into. I don't often get to really deep dive into the lore of this game due to the nature of my content being very surface level, let me explain this for the layman. But it's really nice to dig into the meat of the weirdness every now and then. I want to extend a special thanks to UraniumEater for not only having an incredible channel full of useful information to use as research, but also for breaking into my house and entertaining my audience against my consent, while I fed my lactose intolerance. Oh, shit. Speaking of which, I think that ice cream might need to make its way out of me. Make sure you buy a computer, refer a link, subscribe. Fuck. Okay, bye.